So, in a certain previous video, some people took issue when I said that I was not looking forward to Captain Underpants, the most recent DreamWorks film based on a series of popular children's books. And I admit, more people than I thought said that they were looking forward to it. I perfectly understand this, but I do hope that people can also understand that A, I just said I wasn't looking forward to it, it's not as though I said I thought it was going to be garbage or anything, and B, Captain Underpants was not a book series that I read as a child. As such, I have no nostalgic connection to it, so I hope that people can at least acknowledge the apprehension of walking up to a ticket booth and going, "One grown adult for the Captain Underpants movie, please." I mean, come on, guys. I think even DreamWorks is a little embarrassed. I'm sure there's a reason I've seen more of this poster in movie theaters than this poster. Though it does make sense, DreamWorks' previous film was a baby in a suit, and now it's a grown man in his underpants. But this was still DreamWorks, and the books had to be popular for a reason. So how did it ultimately turn out? And I think the most prominent thing to say is that Captain Underpants knows exactly what it is and what it's trying to do, and it actually does it pretty well. From what I can tell, the movie's story is pretty similar to the first book, though with several minor changes and replacing the villain with one that appears later. But how close it is in adaptation can be commented on by people who actually know the books. For those who don't know, the film stars friends George and Harold, who spend their time out of school making their own comic book, Captain Underpants, which is a pretty unsubtle imitation of Superman. See, superheroes look like they're fighting in their underwear. That's the joke! And their time in school planning elaborate pranks, especially on their super mean principal, Krupp. Eventually, they end up hypnotizing their principal into thinking that he is their comic hero, and they have to deal with / enjoy the consequences while a full-on supervillain invades their school. This movie and its book series are obviously aimed toward a younger demographic, if you can't already tell that from the titles of most of its books. The difference is, unlike some studios who think, oh, it's a kids movie, that means we don't have to try as hard, this movie was clearly made by very talented people who cared. Also, big famous studio with money and resources, that's worth mentioning. The animation is fun, expressive, and crazy, but still clean and cohesive, and clearly done by skilled professionals with a sense of humor, and it even varies in style, occasionally using childlike 2D comic designs, cutouts, and even a scene with sock puppets, and it's amazing. The dialogue might be immature at times, but it wasn't grating or annoying. The characters were sympathetic, and for the first time in a long time for DreamWorks, I could not instantly tell which celebrities were doing which voices. Almost like they were acting. I mean, except for Kristen Schaal, but even then wasn't just trying to do a retread of Mabel, but George was freaking Kevin Hart, and I didn't instantly know that because he was actually being somewhat subdued. I mean, yeah, there's some credit taken away, because if you're gonna have kid characters, I always think that you should star kids, but still. And Ed Helm as both Krupp and Captain Underpants was fantastic, Nick Kroll as the villain, and then Weird Al does a pretty good end credit song, which actually adds another layer for adaptation, because I do think at some point in the books the boys mention being fans of Weird Al. And already I'm seeing a lot of 90s throwback in this story, which makes sense as the first book was published in 97, what with the premise of children versus the one-dimensionally evil adults, and the old stereotype of the bespectacled super smart nerd character that's basically a mini adult, and that he's not only not interested in anything childish, but has the intelligence to rival a nuclear physicist. And unsurprisingly, this is not a movie to care about things like logic or plot holes. I mean, you could comment on how a plastic ring with a spiral on it not only hypnotizes a person, but glows and make everything in the room float, and no one brings it up again, or how the villain says that he hates children for laughing at his name, but his dramatic flashback involves adults laughing at his name, but who cares? These two are in bubbles. Now, it's not quite cut and dry why this movie seems to work while others don't as well, but primarily I think it comes down to just really well executed comedy. Most big studio animations still feel like they need to mildly resemble the Pixar formula and have a movie that is both funny and emotional, but even now that's still a difficult balancing act, and if you don't have a particularly good writer or a good concept, sometimes that results in a movie not being very good at either, where Captain U only only really had to focus on being funny, and even that's selling it short because it still manages to give its characters arcs and be pretty likable. Also, because of the much more simplified cartoony animation, it is a fantastic canvas for more creative, wacky, exaggerated visuals that don't need to be weighed down by as much physical logic. But I think the real intelligent touch here was that in the way they framed the story, despite the nature of the books, or maybe the books did this too, it doesn't really rely on its bathroom humor to be its primary comedy. I mean, it is its main gimmick, but where other big Hollywood movies with its character-oriented stories feel like if they haven't had a joke in a while, feel like they need to stop the story and stick a butt on the screen to make sure the kids aren't bored, this one does not expect you to laugh whenever they say Underpants, Wedgie, or Uranus, partly because they know the kids will anyway, and they say them so often, but more importantly, it just needs you to know that the characters in the movie think it's funny, because it's actually relevant to the story. The real humor comes from the snappy animation, Captain U's lack of intelligence, and the large amount of self-aware meta-humor, which does seem to be the go-to in young media to make the older people laugh.
Wow, that's a lot of pranks.
Yeah, when it's cut all together like that, you really get a sense of the scope.
Some of those must have been really hard to pull off.
And dangerous, like that tiger?
Yeah, I can't honestly say that the humor is groundbreaking, and I certainly can't say that every single joke works. I mean, I'm pretty sure the phrase, "I'm totally not an evil supervillain," died when Little Karibo did it. But it's just that it's pulled off with such skill and energy, and I was genuinely surprised how much I was laughing during this film. And heck, just because it wasn't following the same formula as every other animated film and was definitely visually distinct, made it feel very unique and not quite as repetitive and tired as every other movie I've been forced to sit through. But then again, it is still a story about a hypnotized guy in his underwear fighting a giant toilet. So I can't say that I'm gonna see this again in a hurry, or even advocate that other older audiences that don't have a nostalgic connection to this book series rush out and pay $10 for it. But if you're a tag-along to someone else who does really want to see it, I do think you'd be surprised. I do think that fans of the book and fans of animation will be very happy with it, and I'm still very impressed, given my ambivalent initial impressions, how much creativity and work went into it and how much fun I got out of it. Further proving that my biggest problem is when people force me to sit through the same thing over and over again. And speaking of which...
Just one heist.
It's not a bird and it's not a plane. Ha ha! And it's not an egg salad sandwich. It's the